Okay, 6:35, so we're going to get started now. I'm going to do some introduction and lay some ground rules for tonight's forum. Uh, Before anything else, I want to say hello to everyone who's come out tonight. My name is Maurice. I'm from the Adult School of the Montclair Public Library. And I want to thank you all for coming out to An African American Dilemma, a history of school integration and civil rights in the North. We're lucky to have Dr. Zoe Burkholder and Krista Rappaport. And we thank Montclair State University for partnering with the Adult School to make tonight possible. You should all be muted except for our speakers tonight. We're doing that because of the the size of the audience tonight. So you'll be muted for the length of the presentation and the conversation between our guests. We will open the forum to Q&A when they are finished their portion. And because of the size of the audience, we ask that you type your questions into the chat box, the chat window. Now for the introductions. Dr. Burkholder is a historian of education whose research focuses on the history of racial equality and school integration in the United States from the 1840s through to the present. She is an expert on the history of anti-racist education and director of the MSU Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights Education Project. She holds a PhD in history of education from New York University, an MA in anthropology from the University of California, Berkeley, and is a BA in anthropology and archaeology from the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. Krista Rappaport Esquire is an attorney by background with extensive regulatory experience at companies as diverse as Fortune 500 companies to startups. She started her career as a baccalaureate registered nurse in Philadelphia and has even designed managed care networks. She has experience in U.S. and international legal matters and compliance at licensures, including MGAs, FMOs, hope I'm saying it right, and other agencies. She's also worked in product development, lead generation, and financial exams. She is an ardent volunteer in support of civil rights, a member of the NAACP, and works on their education committee. She's also chair of the Montclair Civil Rights Commission, which is charged with protecting citizens from affronts due to race, creed, color, and national origin and nationality. And she also holds a Bachelor's of Science in Nursing from Rutgers University and a Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia School of Law. Join me in welcoming both Krista Rappaport and Dr. Zoe Burkholder. Take it away. Thank you both.
Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Maurice. And thank you, Patty, for having us here tonight. Thank you, Krista, for joining me for this conversation. And thank you so much to everybody who is logged in here this evening. I was disappointed not to be able to meet you in person at the Montclair Public Library, but it does make it a little bit easier to have this program online. And I'm so pleased that so many people are here for this discussion, which I'm sure will be a great one. So Krista and I thought it would be an effective format if I begin by introducing my book and talking a little bit about the research there, with a special focus on Montclair and New Jersey and the history of school integration. She's then going to offer some comments and feedback based on her perspective as an attorney and a civil rights activist and parent in Montclair. And we're then interested in opening it up for questions from the audience. So while the first portion of the talk, Krista and I will be doing the talking, but you're welcome to make comments or questions in the chat box, and we will be able to monitor that as soon as we're done talking. And we will be able to take questions from the chat box as well. So if that is a good setup for us, let's get started. I'm so excited to be talking to you all tonight about my new book, which is called An African American Dilemma, a history of school integration and civil rights in the North. I thought I would start out this evening by focusing on the question of how I came to become involved in this research. And the answer to that question is I was lucky enough to stumble upon a mystery in the historical record. And if you're a historian, that's a really wonderful thing to happen. And what happened to me is when I started working at Montclair State University, I became interested in the local history of education in the state. And I stumbled across the story of the Manual Training and Industrial School for Colored Youth in Bordentown, New Jersey. Now, this school, which some of you are probably familiar with, is a real anomaly in the history of education, and it challenged virtually everything that historians know about education in this country. So it was a real puzzle, and I became very interested in it. For one thing, it's a segregated all-Black school, but it's located in the North. And for another thing, it's modeled after Booker T. Washington's vision of manual training and industrial education, which was practically obligatory for Black schools in the segregated South during this period, but most often rejected by African Americans in the North who preferred a more traditional academic curriculum. It was a public boarding school with over 200 acres of beautiful land and facilities, including dormitories, classroom buildings, workshops, vocational training facilities, all sorts of sports facilities. It was a really remarkable school, and it was free and open to any Black student in the state of New Jersey. For a final twist, the school was actually closed down as a direct result of Brown versus Board of Education. The ruling was in 1954, and the school was closed a year later. Black families, students, and teachers in New Jersey were angry and horrified. They couldn't understand how a civil rights case, one that promised to advance Black equality and educational opportunities, had such a detrimental effect on a cherished Black school in the North. What happened next was that the school supporters went to Trenton and they met with state leaders, and for 2 days, a stream of students, parents, family members, and alumni went in front of lawmakers and testified as to all the reasons that this school had changed their lives and it was a positive force for good, and they thought it should be kept open. It shouldn't be closed. And at the same time, kind of buried in the historical record, hidden in the archives, were 2 telegrams. One was sent by the NAACP, and the other was sent by the National Urban League. These were the 2 largest and most important civil rights organizations at the time. And they both sent messages to state lawmakers in New Jersey. And the message was, please close this school. Civil rights activists were unhappy that the school offered this kind of anachronistic, segregated facility with a vocational education program, and they wanted the students to be sent home to attend school on an integrated basis. The governor agreed, and the school was closed in 1955. This fierce and kind of confusing debate over the Bordentown school illustrates the central theme of my new book, namely that school integration has always been a contested strategy among Northern Black educational activists. Integrationists, like the civil rights activists associated with the NAACP, contended that mixed schools not only equalized educational opportunities by giving Black students fair access to public goods, but also, and sometimes more importantly, that integrated schools symbolized equal Black citizenship and helped reduce racial prejudice through prolonged interracial contact among youth. Separatists, on the other hand.
Excuse me, Zoe.
Yeah.
There's one comment I think it's important that I address that. This school was open to both males and females. And that's an important thing to note, that throughout many of these schools, they were coeducational. Back to you, Zoe.
Yeah, that's right. It was open to men and women. And although it was designed and intended for African-American students, there were at least 2 times when white students enrolled in the school, showed up, moved into the dormitories, attended classes for a little while, and then unenrolled. So it was technically open to all students in the state of New Jersey. It's just that it happened to be essentially designed, run, and used mostly by African-American students. So here we have these integrationists who had kind of one vision of how school integration could advance the Black freedom struggle. And on the other hand, were separatists, in this case, at this moment in Bordentown, often students, families, and teachers who had a vision that Black schools run by Black teachers essentially offered the best chance for academic success for Black students. And that this in turn would provide access to better jobs, more Black students would graduate from high school, it would raise the Black standard of living, grow the Black middle class, and ultimately boost political and economic power in Black communities. So both separatists and integrationists were pursuing the kind of same goals, which was to advance the Black freedom struggle, to make public education work well for Black families, to grow economically and politically. It's just that they had competing strategies. Now, both sides had compelling logic and persuasive evidence to back up their claims. For example, W.E.B. Du Bois actually put forward evidence that said, look, we have more Black high school graduates coming out of the segregated schools of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore than we do out of the integrated schools of Philadelphia and New York City. And that was true in the 1920s. And on the other hand, many examples throughout the North showed, and to the South, showed that school segregation led to stark and terrible inequality. So it created this kind of constant problem, and that in the end created this long-running dilemma, thus the name of my book, The African-American Dilemma. And the problem was this kind of constant battle over how to fix the problem of racial inequality in public education. Because that inequality started with the very first public schools and has persisted to the present day, these debates still exist. They started in the 1840s and they come to the present day. Now, my book, as you know, focuses on communities in the North, which makes it somewhat unusual when we look at the history of school desegregation, because most of those studies come out of segregated schools in the South in the era of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But my book is a little different, and I focus on communities in the North, and these are places where you have the largest Black communities that developed over the course of the first and second Great Migrations. So the states of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Connecticut, and Massachusetts feature prominently in my history because these states had large, diverse, and politically active Black communities. Most northern states outlawed school segregation in the late 19th century, which created more time and space for Black educational activists to experiment with school integration strategies than in the South, where school desegregation did not begin in earnest until 1964. There was no single reform that worked for all the thousands of diverse schools and communities throughout the North, which is why Black educational activism substantially broadened participation in the freedom struggle as people took direct action against the educational racism they personally encountered in their local schools. Now, many of these people wouldn't have even considered themselves civil rights activists. It's just that they saw some kind of gross or terrible inequality that their children were experiencing or that they themselves experienced, and they stood up for themselves. They had the law on the side. The schools weren't supposed to be segregated. They were supposed to be equal, open to all, serving the public, and they were these important sites of Black civil rights activism. The central argument of my book is that either school integration or separation dominated the political discourse of Northern Black political activists during particular historical eras. During each period, a chorus of dissent, debate, and counter narratives pushed Black communities to consider a fuller range of educational reform. So for example, this is how the chapters in the book are broken up. In this early period, we see supporters fighting for integration, and yet still there were people who were advocating for separate Black controlled schools. And there's this kind of back and forth transition that takes place when we look at this long history. Okay, for my talk this evening, I'd like to focus on the history of school desegregation in New Jersey. Like all Northern communities, New Jersey's first public schools tended to either exclude or segregate Black children. Many families in the 19th century associated school integration with concurrent efforts to abolish slavery and establish Black citizenship. Following a very public and very fascinating battle over school integration in Fairhaven in 1881, the New Jersey state legislature outlawed school segregation. So it was illegal after 1881 in the state to segregate students by race. However, instead of disappearing, school segregation increased as Black Southerners migrated north and as Jim Crow and the ideology of racism hardened in the United States, also seeping north into many Northern communities. Now, this created a challenge when it came to school segregation because it was officially outlawed in the North, including in New Jersey. School leaders were put in the difficult position where they had to claim not to segregate students by race while quietly using school assignment and transfer policies to engineer very high levels of school segregation. Of course, Black families noticed and objected, and they organized school boycotts, filed lawsuits, and had other forms of activism trying to halt the expansion of school segregation, but they were not successful in this effort. Whites, meanwhile, quickly realized they could dampen Black objections to the creation or expansion of school segregation by hiring Black teachers to teach in newly created all Black classrooms or schools. School segregation increased in the North after 1900 because of white racism, not Black preference for separate schools. But the context was dire in many communities, and Black families faced an impossible choice between fighting to keep their children in integrated schools run by often openly hostile whites, or accepting the expansion of separate classrooms and schools, which now came in many cases, but not all, with Black teachers. In these separate schools, Black teachers taught Negro history and held children to the highest academic expectations. Black students had virtually no chance of studying with a Black teacher unless they attended a separate classroom or school before World War II. For instance, in 1930, a survey found one high school teacher who was Black working in the state of New Jersey in a racially mixed high school in Jersey City. She was the only one. Other than that, there were 32 Black teachers at the Manual Training and Industrial School for Negro Youth in Bordentown. So it gives you a sense of where Black teachers were working. So the growing number of Black teachers in the state of New Jersey, and that it was a growing population, was growing because they were all working in these segregated classrooms and schools. In the photo on the slide right there are two interesting pictures I wanted to point out. One shows the organization of teachers of colored children in the state of New Jersey. Both New Jersey and Pennsylvania had state-run professional associations.
Excuse me, Zoe, I don't think they
Yeah.
can see, I think you have to share your screen.
Really?
Hold on. I don't think they can see the photo.
Let us use the magic of Zoom.
Maurice, can you? Yeah. Yeah, they can. There's a chat response. They cannot see the slides or photos. So at the bottom of the screen, the green in the middle, share screen, click on that.
Yeah, we wish. Maurice, I don't have the screen, the share screen button. It's gone.
Really?
Oh.
You should.
I have it, but I don't have the slides.
Yeah, your coach have it. Oh, there you go.
Oh, things are happening. I see Debbie's screen, which is interesting. That's bad news for the other photos I've already showed you all.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
We didn't know you were even showing. I thought you were done.
For our audience, what Zoe's been talking about, the fancy word is de jure versus de facto. So even though the laws have been changed, de facto they had not. And it's complicated because there's so many laws in real estate and banking and insurance, which limited Black people. So if you could tie people to homes in white areas and then make sure that those people in white areas had their children assigned to certain schools, the North could continue with segregation.
Okay, I see a button now, you guys. Well, okay, hold on. Here we are.
Okay, yes.
Hold on, I'm backing it up a little.
Yes, this would be great. So they could see a few of the.
Okay, we're gonna look at some pictures real fast. The first show some photographs from the Manual Training and Industrial School for Colored Youth at Bordentown, New Jersey. And what you see here are some pictures of the classroom buildings and the students engaged in extracurricular activities and vocational education programs, giving you a sense of the rich offerings at this school. You all can see that, right, Krista?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Yes, it's visible and they look great.
Fabulous. Okay, maps we've seen before. Okay, this is an outline of the book and the kind of patterns that go back and forth between school segregation and school integration as Black communities experiment with different strategies. I'll touch base more on that later. This is a photograph that we just have to pause on because it's one of my favorites, and it shows Black teachers and students in Philadelphia. And I know I have a couple of folks here who attended school in Philadelphia. I love this picture because it captures this moment of joy in the students and in the teachers. It's obviously kind of a happy moment at school. And again, it contrasts so sharply with some of the material that you read in the historical record about how Black students are treated sometimes in mixed schools, and the kind of joy and kind of nurturing environments that some of the all Black schools were providing. Okay, so here we are, we're caught up again, I promise. And on what's on my right, at least, is a photograph that shows the faculty who are working in public schools throughout the state of New Jersey. So this is the Organization of Teachers of Colored Children in the state of New Jersey, a photo from 1932. And these teachers are organized into a professional association where they're coming together at annual meetings to try to advocate to improve educational opportunities for Black students in the state. On the left is a photograph that also, I think, comes from the Philadelphia Public Schools. It's in an all Black school, and here the students are putting on a play. The relevant information here is that, especially before 1945, Black students who attended racially mixed high schools or racially mixed schools in the North often faced such harsh levels of discrimination by white teachers as well as white students and families that they were unable to participate in any of the extracurricular programs, from sports to drama programs to music programs. So all Black schools, including high schools, and getting access to Black teachers was just a really important part of this kind of story, and why there was strong support, especially among families, for the option of these separate Black controlled schools. Okay, let's do Montclair. I think we're ready for Montclair. So Montclair, the story of school desegregation in Montclair corresponds with a massive expansion for campaigns for school integration throughout the Northeast right after World War II. So between 1945 and 1954, Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP actually coordinated a campaign to desegregate Northern public schools. People don't know that history as well as they know the story about what happened in the South. Montclair, of course, had a politically active Black community. And at that time, in the post-war era, they organized together and they did what was called a civil rights audit, which means they're going to document discrimination in housing, education, employment, and other areas. In terms of what they find in education, it's very concerning. Montclair had a number of schools that were majority Black, where the resources tended not to be as strong as in other schools, but they had very few Black teachers in the system. And in fact, in 1946, Black families petitioned and convinced the school district to hire one Black teacher, and that was the only Black teacher that was working in the schools at that time. They documented clearly discriminatory school assignment policies and attempted to use a boycott in 1949 to force school leaders to desegregate the schools.
Zoe, excuse me, Zoe.
Yeah.
I think it's time to let people know a fun fact, and that is our own Dr. Renee Baskerville. She and other students were part of the lawsuits that were folded up into the Brown versus Board of Education. And that's one reason why we have magnet schools in our town. So
yes, there's a lot of people in Montclair, I think, that have been personally involved and their parents were personally involved, African-American families that have been personally involved in school desegregation. So I know some of the history, as we move forward in time, all of a sudden this isn't history for some of our audience members. For some of the younger students, it will be. 1961, now we're talking, things start to really happen in Montclair. We're now in the middle of a much more active, more successful national Black civil rights movement. And here we have, if you can see that photograph, it's not a great one. It's a clip from the New York Times. And what it shows is Black mothers with the students, they have children at Glenfield, and they are protesting against segregation and inequality in the Montclair public schools. And this time, parents organize and they work together and they get a massive boycott going with students and families from Glenfield and Cedar Avenue School, what we now call Nishwain School, opening boycotting the opening day of class and demanding a change to school integration. Now, the superintendent at the time was completely resistant to this protest, and he said, quote, "I don't understand at all why they should consider this a desirable thing to do," end quote. And he strongly tried to resist any changes to school assignment policies or what was happening in Montclair. Now, if you're a resident of Montclair, this might be the moment where you're going, okay, here we are, it's the 1960s. I know Montclair is going to come together and make this thing happen. Sadly, you're not right. We are not there yet. And this early school integration movement in Montclair was not met with warmth and welcoming open arms by the white community, but instead, as in virtually every other Northern community, these school desegregation efforts and school equalization efforts by Black community members were met, for the most part, with resistance and hostility. In Montclair, we have a new organization that was founded by families called the Committee for Neighborhood Schools, and their goal was to keep school desegregation from happening. Of course, they're going to chastise Black families for asking for what they called a hasty radical departure from the neighborhood school program. And never will these white folks acknowledge the degree to which our neighborhoods and school assignment policies had been explicitly racist for generations. So the Board of Education gives some indication it's willing to allow some of the Black families from Glenfield to attend middle school at Mount Hebron if they want. And when they make this statement, they begin to put into place this attempt to create some transfer options. White parents file a lawsuit to block the school, that modest level of transfers, claiming the constitutional rights of white students will be violated if Black students are permitted to transfer into their school. The New Jersey Supreme Court actually agreed with the white parents on this case, and at the same time instructed Montclair to get with the program and desegregate its clearly racially imbalanced schools. What followed was a long and bitter battle to desegregate the Montclair public schools. White community members objected to every single desegregation proposal and insisted on maintaining the status quo of segregated neighborhood schools, a situation that persisted for years. Finally, under increasing state pressure, school leaders experimented with a new tactic, magnet schools. After speaking to parents, they opened Bradford Magnet School as an elementary school in the North with this back to basics curriculum that Black parents valued and said that they would be interested in. And down at Cedar Avenue School or Nishwain, they offered a gifted and talented program specifically to appeal to white families. The whole thing worked. Many parents started opting into the new magnet schools, and they were assigned free buses to get their kids to school in the easiest possible way. Both schools became much more diverse within a few years, and through the 1980s, the controlled choice magnet program was expanded to all the elementary and middle schools. Now, by 1990s, Montclair was hailed as an integration Eden. And in fact, there were many things about the system that were working very well. And the schools tended to be very racially diverse and mixed up. Real estate values remained, as you all know, very high. And in general, people felt very content with this system. However, just because the schools were desegregated did not mean that they were equal. And Black families found that they had to continue to fight to address myriad problems related to racial inequality in the public schools. And again, there's a photograph on the slide of an article from the New York Times where David Herron of the district's Human Relations Council is pointing out that desegregation in Montclair stopped at the schoolhouse door, specifically pointing to very high levels of segregation inside the schools, which was happening because teachers were using tracking or ability grouping to place students into specific classes based on their so-called perceived ability. And of course, largely because many white teachers were still the majority in the school district. And for other reasons, many Black students were being placed in the lower level and remedial courses while white students were being placed in the advanced courses. There were other problems as well. And it became clear to Black civil rights activists that the school leaders were prioritizing retaining and attracting white families over the goal of equalizing education for Black ones. And there was all sorts of different evidence that kind of proved this point. This meant Black families had to continue to fight for educational equality within what was now a racially mixed and appropriately desegregated system. Black families had to explain to school leaders that simply mixing students together was not enough to remedy generations of educational racism and inequality. They demanded things like an end to the tracking programs, more Black teachers, a more relevant curriculum, modifications to school discipline policies, anti-bias training for teachers and administrators. Many of these strategies that Black families were bringing to the table come from or draw on the long tradition of separate Black controlled schools. For example, in 1989, community members founded a new program called Imani, designed to nurture and support Black students within a desegregated school system. So you see the kind of interesting blending of these strategies of integration and separation. Have we achieved racial equality in the Montclair public schools? We know the answer to that question is no, and that problems remain, especially in terms of an opportunity gap and a corresponding achievement gap. But what is notable is that Montclair has not given up on school integration as an essential component of the best possible public education for all students. And today, integrated schools remain a strong draw for both Black and white families. The work continues, and it is heartening to see so many white families join the effort to equalize our public schools, and the work of the Montclair Fund for Educational Excellence, as well as our local teachers union, has worked hard to bring people to the table and to create new strategies and deliberate efforts to counter racism and create more equitable schools. I'm going to conclude tonight by reflecting on what we learned from my book in general, this long history of school integration in the North. First, I think this history shows that public schools have been potent sites of civil rights activism since the 1840s. If you want to understand the Black civil rights movement in the North, you have to look at what's happening in the public schools. Second, it's clear that school integration has not always been the only or even the dominant reform strategy preferred by Black families. At times, African Americans have advocated for other reforms, including the option of all Black schools within a legally desegregated system. Third, and this is a point in my book that I don't spend a lot of time talking about, but it's clearly there, whites have consistently opposed virtually every reform effort to equalize public education for Black students in the North. This includes school integration. It also includes community control of schools for Black families or equalizing funding for all schools. That is a problem that I think we need to acknowledge and talk about if we're going to address it and move forward. Finally, the future of educational reform must draw on aspects of both school integration and separation to generate effective and meaningful reform. Simply mixing kids up in a school isn't enough. We need to see real efforts to decolonize curriculum and pedagogy, hire more Black teachers, create fair disciplinary policies, equalize access to technology and the internet, and ensure that the extracurricular programs are equally accessible to all. And that is just the beginning of a long list that many people are bringing to us today. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Krista. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me for this conversation.
And Dr. Burkholder, thank you for all this and these glorious slides. Just because you're giving the floor and I have a very big mouth, I'm going to say a few things. One, yeah, we are very lucky in Montclair, but there is a significant gap, and we can see this in the AP curriculum and the students who are enrolled. We are missing the boat. I've been so thrilled that Montclair has made some points like administering the math test to all fifth graders. In the past, it was selective. And so this is good, but this is all these points and the continuous segregation, in fact, of students points to the fact that the North has wrongly always enjoyed a superior position as compared to South in terms of the perception of its attention to racial equality. And so the Yankees are not the winners in this case. They are probably equal losers with the South. And I think it's spectacular that you emphasize this, and your book is not about the whites and protesting, but the strategy, the intellectual exercises, and the actions taken by Black academics and Black activists and normal Black African-American parents who wanted something different. My mother in Philadelphia went to Germantown High School and was called a black nigger every single day of, she went to school. And that's before all of Philadelphia was desegregated, and that resulted in a white flight and a new section of Philadelphia called the Great White Northeast. So, and that was actually the title of it. But with that in mind, we know that in America, we have the value of liberty for all. And that is, that has been cast aside by so many laws that still remain in fact. Occasionally, I still find another harbinger of this, but I just want to say, thank you on that. In terms of questions, I just have a few for you. One, this is economy and values versus actual actions in education. Did the American values that themselves, did they inspire the African-American activists to reach for educational opportunity and justice?
Do you want me to answer that now? Or
yes.
You can, okay.
Yes, please.
Absolutely. I think one of the interesting things about this educational activism that we see coming out of Northern Black families is that it is a profoundly patriotic movement. These are folks who are envisioning public education and its relationship to democracy in America in a really kind of pure and essential way. From the very beginning, when you have activists like Frederick Douglass back in the 1850s, who's saying that only through integrated schools can we ever remove the stigma of caste. Those were his words before Isabella Wilkerson got to it. We have to remove the stigma of caste by sending children together and putting them together in a place where they can get to know each other, they can work together as equals, and they can prepare for their future roles and obligations as citizens. And certainly the democratic ideals, the idea of a fair chance for everybody, which is part of the American creed, right? That democracy doesn't privilege anybody, that your socioeconomic status or your race shouldn't give you an unfair advantage or a head start in life. These are profoundly American values, and African Americans bought into those values. They wanted to make them work, especially for themselves and for their children. And they saw a really essential relationship between public education and creating better opportunities for themselves and for Black communities and Black political advancement. So I think you are correct, Krista, that there was a strong alignment between American values and the way that African Americans were viewing public education in different ways, right? Different strategies, but the goals were always the same. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. That is very interesting. And I do wonder though, it occurred to me, there's a renewed emphasis and recognition about the value of the HSBCUs, especially for students who are coming from schools that are not, where they're not as prepped as kids who they're going to compete with, because HSBCU sees the student and brings out the value and the intelligence, and so in that nurturing. And so I'm wondering, we see that so clearly today that that's a value for many students, but during the time from the 1840s on, did activists take one stance, segregation versus integration? Were they at wars? Was there a continuous debate in the community? I would love to hear about that.
Yeah, there was a continuous debate in the community, and some people had a kind of ideological association with one or the other. Black civil rights activists who tended to be, especially before the 1940s, more associated with the Black elite. So they tended to be college educated. They were working as doctors and dentists, and other leaders in the community. And they really had a strong preference for integration that was kind of ideological in that way. Like they believed that integration symbolized equal citizenship, and anything else was giving up too much in terms of political rights. Black families were a little bit more pragmatic. And you see a little bit more flexibility. And it does get interesting because Black parents will even change sides. So I have examples of Black moms in Norwalk, Connecticut, and they are marching the picket line, fighting for school integration. And 4 years later, they say, now I'm on the other side. I want to end this school integration program. I don't like how it's working for my child. It is not creating better opportunities. And they have a much more pragmatic approach. They want one strategy to improve a given problem that they identify in their school. And if that strategy doesn't work, they are more than willing to throw it out and try another one, because what they want is literally like the highest level of educational attainment their child can get. Like that's their goal. It was a high school diploma for a long time, and then it morphed into a college diploma, right? But the question is really, how do I get to that goal for my kid? That's what they wanted. And they were open-minded. The other thing that's interesting is that, of course, a lot of the separatists were inspired by Black nationalist ideology. And we tend to associate that with the Black Power movement and Malcolm X. But there is, in fact, a very long and very rich tradition of Black nationalism in the United States. And you can really see an uptick in support for Black separatism in the schools right around the time where Marcus Garvey became very popular in 1915 and 1916. And Philadelphia, New York, and New Jersey were some of the places where activists were attending these rallies, listening to speakers who were either Marcus Garvey or associated with his movement, reading materials about Black nationalism and a kind of pan-Black national identity. And absolutely becoming persuaded that that was a better deal than what was taking place in racially mixed classrooms where white teachers and white administrators had virtually all the power. So, you know, people were very well informed about all the possibilities and all the multiple meanings of both strategies, and they were making informed decisions about which of those they preferred, integration or separation. It's hard to support both at the same time. That's what was happening to people. If you have one group of people fighting to integrate a school, and in order to do that, they have to close down the Black school and reassign all the students and teachers, then it really, it made people pick sides. Like you had to pick. Supporting integration meant disbanding that Black school, firing those Black teachers, and scattering those Black students into majority white schools. And that was a difficult choice when it came down to it.
That is a Hobbesian's choice. And I have to say that we talk about parents so many times, it's about what's good for our children. And when we talk about, okay, I look inequality versus now and then, you know, one root cause seems to be lower socioeconomic status. And I can say that with my children, almost all the African-American students at their school, by either third grade, there was an exodus, or by fifth grade, there was another exodus to private schools. And there's a curious story that I can tell you. When my eldest child was about to turn 5, it was at an elite Black party in 07043 Upper Montclair. And three of the party attendees said, "Oh, so where is your son going to go to school?" And I said, "Public school, because we believe in public school." One thumbs up. And he said, "Oh my goodness, should you enroll your child in Montclair Public Schools, you will doom your child to an inferior educational status." And in fact, at that party, every single one of that, you know, there were like 30 families. We were the only public school person there. And I thought it was appalling, because I thought, no, that's not going to be the case, and I will stick to that. But when I see what's happened, when I see the exodus, when I see, you know, the disparate results, I want to say, you know, to you, and some of them I could see, and there was a comment in the chat, some things in Montclair, we see a bunch of nepotism. And I was at an elementary school where 4 first cousins were teaching in one elementary school. So with that in mind, I have to say, what challenges do you see for Montclair Superintendent Dr. Jonathan Pons in reducing achievement gaps between Black and white students here? I know that's not the topic of the book, but you are an expert.
No, thank you. And I think your story about your own experiences and the experiences of upper middle class and wealthy Black families facing another difficult choice, right? They live in Montclair. It's a racially progressive, beautifully desegregated community with very high quality public schools with an excellent reputation. And we all know that. But for African-American families, there's other levels and layers to that choice. And certainly what I was talking about, the fact that Montclair successfully created racially mixed schools, and now we have successfully created racially mixed classrooms, but we haven't solved the problem of racial inequality in public schools. We know that, like you and I know that, and certainly Black families know that, you know, so we're not telling anybody anything they don't know. And it does create a real challenge and a real dilemma. How many families have the option to send their kids to private school for $45,000 or more, dollars a year? Not that many, certainly nationally, it's not a big number, but it does speak to the way that Black families are experiencing public education in Montclair, in a very high quality, very desegregated school system, where still they feel that there are problems there, that they don't want to risk putting their children into a precarious situation if they can afford to avoid it. So it's understandable. As for what Dr. Pons can do, he seems to be a remarkable man. He has a real vision for improving public education, and he came on board, I think within months we had this pandemic hit. And it feels to me, and I am a parent of students in the Montclair Public Schools, that so much of the school's energy and resources have been just completely taken up by dealing with the pandemic. And by the way, the exacerbation in racial inequality and socioeconomic inequality that pandemic has caused in public education. So it's made the problem of racial inequality worse. And I know the district has plans in place to try to address what we call the opportunity gap and the achievement gap. I don't think I have like a quick and easy answer for you, though. I know there's a long list of kind of plans in place and efforts to make changes in the school system. From a scholarly perspective, what scholars would probably fall back on, and you might agree with this as an attorney, is that it's asking a lot to ask public education, public schools to completely equalize opportunity for children in public schools when kids are coming to us from such different backgrounds and families with such different opportunities. And so what scholars talk about is fortifying what we call wraparound services. So what we need to do is, if we're trying to—
that I believe in that, like a high quality aftercare.
Yeah.
By my teachers.
Yeah, we need, it's not just a question of like making schools better or making teachers better. We need to provide better healthcare. We need to make sure that kids' parents have high quality jobs. They can take time off if a kid is sick or there's a pandemic. We need to make sure there's recreational opportunities for all. You know what I mean? So there's this kind of like big picture.
What do you think about something to be having a magnet school in Montclair for African-American students only?
I think it's a really interesting idea. And I had a couple extra slides in my slideshow, but I cut them back out. But if you Google it, what are called Afrocentric schools are really popular right now in New York City, and they're gaining in popularity. They tend to be part of the public school system or sometimes charter schools. And these are schools that have a dedicated Afrocentric approach, with a deliberate goal of meeting the needs of Black children. And so it tends not to be kind of all Black the way separate schools were once all Black, but the faculty works hard to recruit teachers of color, and they work hard to create a curriculum that focuses on Black history, all sorts of things. These schools are very popular in many cities in the North. And it is interesting, I think, as one choice for parents within a formally desegregated system. I happen to be a big, strong supporter of school integration as a strategy. I think the takeaway message from my book is that any kind of separation within public education can lead to inequality and problems, and that integration is an essential component of seeking not only equal opportunities, but more importantly, in a way, like fulfilling the civic function of public schooling, which really is to bring us together as citizens in a community for a shared purpose and a shared goal. So,
you know, when you talk about civic purpose, I applaud that and I agree, but there's an issue that sticks in my mind. And, you know, currently I hear this sound bite going around, and the sound bite is, don't tutor your kids, don't do this. And I'm thinking, okay, you have family A that can afford vacations to Europe and China and skiing and the best tech and everything else. You're going to tell them don't enrich their children? How about we say, what are the things that high achieving families do for their children? And then we emulate them and provide them for other kids. And we talk to McPhee and say, how about if we fund this, because we have a lot of wealth in this community. So I'm thinking about some alternative things, because, you know, I would say, how dare you tell me not to do the best for my one child, and that's my only child, and I give down and my investments in that child. So there are some, you know, I don't think that the answer is telling people don't do, but I'm thinking, what can we do so that our outcomes across, and I'm not ignoring his Latinx community or AAPI community, but I'm looking at historical Black versus white demographics, because our demos don't seem that sound to me. And I don't know, you know, all the answers, but you know, or whether there can be changes in existing methods.
I mean, I love that proposal. It's kind of like taking the idea of wraparound services and expanding them to be not just basic necessities like food, health, and water, but really the kind of enrichment opportunities that we would love to see all kids have access to. Yeah.
So did the, now turning a little bit to the academic community, were they surprised by your focus, that you weren't focusing on angry white mobs, but you were talking about like the strategic initiatives?
I'm not sure. I know one of the things that was different about my book was my broad framing. So typically when scholars look at the history of, for example, school desegregation or Black educational activism in the North, what they do is they pick like one city, like New York or Chicago or Hartford, or a smaller community maybe for a journal article. And they do like a really intense, really careful study there. And the reason for that is we just have such tremendous variety in our public education. Like literally, as we know in New Jersey, every school district is different. And then every state has different laws about public education. In America, it's really such a local initiative that it's very challenging to do a broad survey of an entire region that spans the entire period of public education. So I kind of drew on my background as a social scientist as well as a historian to amass a huge amount of data and to sort through it and to really make sense of it. So it was really a kind of social science analysis as well as a historical one. And definitely, I think it does throw into sharp relief exactly the extent of white resistance to school desegregation, something that Northerners, I think white Northerners in particular, tend to give themselves a pass on, right? Like, oh, well, that wasn't a problem we had here. Like, oh, that was the Jim Crow South.
Yes.
It was like amazing that persisted, that same perspective persisted through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, as Black parents are literally picketing like, this is a segregated school, and white parents are like, what on earth are you fussing about, you know? And so it's whatever that is, that deliberate obfuscation of the issues, I think is very revealing, and someone needs to spend more time on it. Yeah.
I agree. I think there's an elephant in the room, and that is, can this Black kid really be so smart, and are they going to dumb down my kid? And that's something that people don't like to see. We see massive resistance from the Irish, then the Italians, and then the Jews. We know in the city of Newark, New Jersey, next door, there was massive white flight from the Jews first. And, you know, I come from a mixed family, so I can say that. But actually it's factual. But it's refreshing in a way that your book doesn't focuses on the strategies and attention to effective pedagogy and how to get to it. But I'm just wondering, did the African-American leaders in places like Newark, Montclair, New Jersey, Englewood, New Jersey, Philadelphia, New York, or other places collectively strategize? I'm getting the sense that they did, since Thurgood Marshall was involved in the Urban League. But I was wondering, what did they do putting pen to pencil when they were planning?
Yeah, there was a lot of collaboration and people learned lessons, kind of watching something take place in one instance. These stories of the school desegregation battles were covered in the Black press beginning in the 1840s and 50s. So you have abolitionist newspapers that are already reporting on what's taking place and documenting these struggles, explaining different strategies, sharing different tactics. So there were certainly communication networks that were active, and people were coming together and sharing strategies. In some cases, like Newark has the most fascinating educational history. It really does. But one of the things that happened in Newark is folks there watched New York City, which had this massive school integration campaign in the 1950s and 60s that kind of transformed into a community-controlled school movement campaign, where Black activists basically got so frustrated and so fed up with white school administrators who refused to desegregate the schools that they said, fine, just let us have control of our own schools. You know what I mean? Just give us community control. We will control teachers and hiring and curriculum and discipline and all that. Like, get these white teachers out of the schools. We got this. That movement was not successful in New York City. It really did not work. Strategists there did not achieve their goals. Activists in Newark watched that happen, and then Newark tipped over to being a majority Black city in the early 1970s, and Black activists and political representatives in Newark, including the Black mayor, were able to take control of the school board, and they tried to essentially institute a plan of community-controlled schools from the position of now being the Black majority in the city. But they couldn't do it either. You know what I mean? And so a lot of times strategies were being shared. There's not a lot of happy stories or good outcomes from these strategies, which is why we're still in the position we are today, where we still have really high levels of racial segregation in our public schools, especially in the North. So New Jersey and New York have some of the highest level of school segregation in the entire country. People don't realize that. They think, oh, it must be Mississippi. No, it's not. Mississippi is better than New Jersey. New Jersey is worse. We have the highest rate of school segregation. It's like New Jersey, New York, Michigan, and California. It's a bunch of northern states. So it's an ongoing problem. None of these solutions have really fully worked.
As part of my regulatory affairs, I worked and traveled to about 42 states. And for what you're saying, I have seen this firsthand with my own eyes, and it is a huge problem for us still. I mean, we see the issues in Montclair, and we see the issues nationally. I'm going to now shift to another one of my long-winded questions. This is about special education. So one thing we see, special education, especially the classification of African-American boys. And we see this, people say, oh, there's so much classification, or you see parents resisting having their kids classified or having a 504 plan. And, basically one thing that these criticisms ignore is the fact that the quality of obstetrical medical care for pregnant Black women is abysmal, and the outcomes are poor. Let's just look at Serena Williams. I'm going to close this chat because it's really just it's distracting. So what I would just say is, given the medical morbidity outcomes for Black women in obstetrical care, do you think that activists should recognize and focus on special education and modalities for younger kids? Because we do know, medically speaking, that infant males up to 2 years old have a higher morbidity and mortality than any other category. So if we could maybe insert modalities earlier and have screening earlier, we might have better outcomes.
I mean, that sounds like a really important point that you're bringing up, and something that desperately needs to be addressed. It's a little bit outside my area of expertise, but I can acknowledge, the data that you're sharing is accurate. And it points again to the fact that equalizing educational opportunities, there's really only so much schools can do from the time we get those kids in kindergarten to the time they're graduating when they're 18. And we do, as a society, need to make a decision as to how we are going to work to equalize opportunities for all children, all people who live in this country. And obviously, healthcare is one of the most essential points that you just have to have care beginning with pregnant women and continuing through infancy and young childhood, so that by the time these kids come into kindergarten, they've already had the best possible medical care, and their mothers as well. Yeah.
I agree. As a former obstetrical and surgical nurse from Thomas Jefferson University Medical Center in Philadelphia, I remember being appalled when there was this really adorable 14-year-old expectant mother. And she said to me, "Please, miss," she grabbed my arm. "You're a sister. You can tell me, where does this baby come out?" This is a woman who's going to deliver in an hour or two, and nobody had taken the time to explain her or even to assess her knowledge. So medical care is really essential. Let's see. Okay. I was going to ask you about whether you know about school assignments, still being linked to real estate in the north outside of Montclair. Is that something you're seeing people still fighting about?
Oh, yes. People are incentivized to fight over school assignment policies because the way that our school districting works pretty much everywhere in the United States, but certainly in the Northeast, is that your location of your home, whether it's a house or an apartment, tends to determine the assignment of your school that your child will go to. And depending on whether your house is zoned for this school or that school, can make a substantial difference in the real estate value of somebody's house. It's one reason you see people go absolutely batshit crazy over school desegregation plans, is because they are faced with what is actually a very real prospect that the value of their house will change and go down as they go from being, a child assigned to this school over here to a child assigned to that school over there, or even if their school where their kid is currently being assigned is somehow viewed as being less elite and less desirable as more Black kids or more lower socioeconomic status kids are transferred into that school. So in some cases, it's like you almost have to have pity for people. I mean, these can be tens of thousands or even hundreds of $1,000s of worth of changes in the real estate value of a house or apartment that they might own. I don't have that much pity for people. And I think, as a state, as a society, we could just make a decision to kind of enact these sweeping changes and do it, so I would love to see us start by abolishing school districts in the state of New Jersey. Like, we don't need these school districts. They're not helpful. They're not rational. They're exclusive and exclusionary. I think that we could fix this as a society. We just have to kind of come together and agree that it's worth doing.
I agree. There's one final thing, is there's been a lot of complaints about Montclair and having less equal schools. And so one thing that has been voiced is that there's been a decrease in diversity, and some of it's due to things like sibling preference. I know that there's some schools where people are having 3 kids or 4 kids, and so that it's put in there, and there are critics of this because they say that's resulting in certain schools having less diversity. What do you think about that type of criticism?
They actually modify these school assignment policies pretty regularly, often to keep track of what's happening in the Supreme Court in terms of the limits to how you can do school desegregation plans. So Montclair updates their school assignment policies pretty regularly anyway. The sibling preference component is not where I would put my effort in trying to dismantle it. I don't
agree.
think I just don't think that's
I
like
know if you told me, when I had young kids, I was pretty strung out by them. I preferred to go
yes,
to work.
me too.
And I'm like, if you told me I had to go to 3 elementary schools, I would have had a fit.
Yeah, no, I mean, really at some point making this workable for families is part of the deal. So yeah, having kids at the same school. Krista, you think we can open it up for
I think
questions?
we can. Yeah, the natives are
how are we
listening.
going to do that? Are we going to have Maurice wanna?
Yeah, Maurice, are you prepared to read out some questions?
Are you curating, Maurice?
Yes, I have. There's a lot of input here, so I'm trying to figure out where actually to start. Obviously, a lot of it is focused on the Montclair district in particular, but I'm going to go back just to one of the questions, I guess, about the history portion, what you talked about, before I get to the current ones. There was a talk, I guess, about, I guess a question I should say, about whether they were allowed to, were Black parents been allowed to segregate during, I guess, after school desegregation? Could we have allowed all Black schools post the desegregation of schools that allowed during that time period?
Yeah, the answer to that is that kind of, right? So the ideas that were kind of prevalent when parents advocated for school separation in the 19th and early 20th century just kind of appear in new and different forms after 1954. In New York City and in parts of the North, especially during the Black Power movement, a lot of parents advocated for community controlled schools. And so what I do is I look at that community controlled school effort, which was essentially a counter initiative to school desegregation plans sweeping the region in the late 60s. And from the perspective of Black Power advocates who supported community controlled schools, they wanted to, number one, stop or dismantle existing school desegregation plans that actually dispersed Black students throughout the community, and instead bring those children back and have them attend their local neighborhood school where the Black community would have control over that school. In particular, be able to bring in Black teachers and adjust the curriculum and other policies like disciplinary policies to meet what they saw as the needs of the Black community. So I'm counting, for example, those community controlled schools as a more contemporary version of separation. Today, if you go to the New York Times or go online and Google Afrocentric schools, you'll see a similar kind of thing. So it's not that public schools today can't exclude anyone because of race, but in some cases, they are allowed to develop a school or a curriculum that is designed to appeal specifically to one group of people. New York City, I think, has a school that's designed to appeal to LGBTQ students, for example. There are some communities that have schools that are public schools designed to appeal and support Muslim students. So there are possibilities and ways to advocate for some of the strands and traditions that come to us from separate schools today.
I know an issue that's been, I think I've been hinted at this earlier, issue around New Jersey has been that of sort of AP classes and gifted programs versus sort of the remedial programs. There's one question, is Montclair really a high quality desegregated school system? We look at things like the demographics of the AP classes. Do you have any opinion on that?
I'm not sure I understood the question exactly, and I don't see it. But I think what you're saying, I mean, certainly we continue, as I understand it, we continue to have unequal representation in our AP classes. Is that right, Krista? So that we have more
that is
white
right.
kids than Black kids.
Now, the thing I have a problem with, and this has bothered me for years, and I don't see it improving substantially, is the AP curriculum is national. The AP exams are national. You can't, you either do it or not. And I think that there has been some steering, and there's been some failures on teachers and the Montclair School District, in my opinion, based on my own anecdotal, view of one person with people. I will look at kids who are doing, had the top par classes, straight A's. They go into certain middle schools and they're not put into the math enrichment. So I just think that there's, so if you're missing certain factors, like mathematics is cumulative, all right? I'm a daughter of an engineer. I'm a mom of a soon-to-be engineer. I know this, right? If you miss certain blocks, you are held back from achieving. So if you're having students who are not going to be promoted and cosseted, and whether it's in social studies, history, English, then when they get to that, they'll feel behind. And what we have is some kids who drop out because, they'll say something and the other kids are like, oh, you don't know that. Oh, that's, poor you. And they leave. Now we need to be promoted. We need to identify school students and be equal in our promotion and education of them so they can handle and tackle that AP curriculum. Well, if they want it, and if they don't, that's fine. There's vocational and other things. One of the biggest needs we have as a country is for qualified welders, right? So, and we don't even have a vocational school in this. We have one in Essex County, but it's not one of the better ones. So yes, we need attention, investment, and strategies. Sorry, I was a little passionate there.
We appreciate it.
That's fine. As far as the teachers go, faculty, staffing, you had a question here about tenure. Is that sort of a barrier to desegregating the staff of some of these schools?
I would say no. I don't think it is. Tenure is a pretty well established practice for public educators in the state of New Jersey and throughout the Northeast. I think it helps to ensure, high quality teaching force. I would love to see more money invested into teacher education and to funding teacher salaries. One of my big plans for educational reform is to just double the salaries of all public school teachers right now, moving forward for time immemorial. And I do work in a college of education, so I admit that I am a little bit biased on this, but I think tenure is not a problem. I don't see that as a problem. There are other things that we need to do. And as someone who works in a college of education, we struggle at Montclair State University in the College of Education to bring in students of color into the teacher of education program. And we have dedicated staff people and resources and programs trying to address that and improve our numbers. And we are improving them, they're better, but this is a really systemic and national problem. The problem isn't tenure in Montclair. I don't think it's anything too specific to Montclair.
I agree with you. I don't think tenure is the issue here at all. And I notice in chat, some people don't like what we say. Someone mentioned something about, don't say anything about the Essex Vocational Technical School. Well, you can have your opinion, sir or madam, and I will have mine. But the bottom line is, I think tenure is one of those things that we do to encourage qualified teachers to stay and continue because they can make much more money in the private sector. And so I think it's a compensation point that has to continue. And I don't think it's the issue either.
On the flip side of this special, I guess the AP classes conversation that we had, do you think that special education being used to further segregation generally in Montclair?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I was reading the comments and I
Yes, no problem. Have you looked at how special education is used to further segregation generally in Montclair? Generally and in Montclair, I should say.
I don't want to answer that question. I don't have the data on it. So I don't know other than kind of more vaguely and incidentally. So I'm gonna respectfully pass on that. It's just not my area of expertise. I don't want to say something that's not correct.
You mentioned, you guys talked about early childhood education early on. What impact has preschool expansion had on closing education gaps?
Certainly, it's been incredibly important, and we can see the expansion of Head Start programs starting in the mid-1960s and continuing to the present day. There's some debate over kind of, I mean, there are now people who have done long-term studies that trace, not only how students who participate in Head Start do in school and high school, but that follow folks through their career and marriage and family. And the evidence is very strong that high quality preschool makes a substantial difference in the quality of life that someone lives. So it's definitely an important component of improving the quality of public education. As is vocational education. I see there's like a little chatter in the system about vocational schools. And, I started my talk off this evening by mentioning the Bordentown Manual Training and Industrial School, which did offer a kind of vocational training. The problem with that original school, and the reason that the NAACP, among other civil rights activists, did not support it, is because of that phrase, manual training and industrial, which really was supported by Booker T. Washington in the post-Reconstruction South as a non-academic option that was more suited to Black students. Now, this was a point of concession that Booker T. Washington and other Black leaders in the South were making in order to expand public education in the system of Jim Crow at that time. But in the North, it was not a beloved option and largely rejected by civil rights leaders. But it doesn't mean that Black families or civil rights leaders rejected vocational education. What they wanted was high quality vocational education that would lead to good paying and secure middle class jobs. And that's what the change they had been trying to make at the Bordentown School for 10 years. The NAACP had been going in there and saying, why in the world are you offering courses in carpentry when we're in the middle of a World War II industrial surge and you should be teaching welding and shipmaking and airplane building and these much more sophisticated vocational programs that were being offered in white schools in the state of New Jersey. And the Bordentown School could not do it. They could not update their curriculum much past beauty products for the girls and automobile repair for the boys. And so it fell out of favor with the Black elite.
But Zoe, yeah. I have to say that even though the Bordentown School closed, in Burlington County, New Jersey, there's the Burlington County Vocational Technical High School. That is a fabulous vocational school. And so I'm just curious of, I know that I'm not sure about the racial makeup of the teachers of Burlington County VOTech, but it would be interesting to know whether there was any transfer of those teachers, but it's not like the VOTech vocational school went away. And I think the IT was there. I'm just wondering if, that was just a way to keep that going.
I don't think it was not a continuation of that manual training and industrial school for Negro youth, the one that was in Bordentown. That school was shut down.
No, I'm saying the idea of it.
The idea of it, no. Americans have had a strong interest in industrial and vocational education since the late 19th and early 20th. So
that was separate from it. Okay.
Yeah. And many Black parents and civil rights leaders are strong supporters of high quality vocational education. The risk is, we don't want to kind of track students into a voc ed program when they're young in high school so that they miss the opportunity to be academically prepared to go to college should they change their mind or decide at a later date that's what they want to do, which is why most of our voc ed schools today also offer a high school diploma, so you can get the classes you need to apply to college or at least go to community college. You know what I mean? So
I do, because there was a Montclair family, they moved to Switzerland. And because of what the kids had taken, they were trapped into two different tracks that they could not alter. So I think it's important that, especially as Americans, we give the kids choice.
Yeah, that's what you don't want to kind of lock them in when they're 14 to a choice. So yeah, the vocational schools in New Jersey are really excellent. This is so fun. Thank you, everyone who's participating in the chat. I'm sorry we can't read and respond to you. They're coming up too quickly to kind of keep track. But I do appreciate all of your comments there, and I definitely look forward to reading through them when I have more time.
Zoe, are you going to tell them how they can get your book?
Thanks, Krista. I am going to tell them how they can get my book. So the book is available on Amazon or any online retailer. It's published by Oxford University Press, and you can go to the website there and order a copy. Thanks so much for considering it. There is a long and detailed section on Montclair, contextualized within this much broader survey of different debates over integration versus separation in cities including Boston, New York, Hartford, Montclair, Philadelphia, Boston, Chicago. I've got a bunch of them in there. So if you're interested, please check it out.
And I have to say, like someone mentions in the chat, they're from Maplewood, New Jersey. And what we could say is like from place after place after place, we're seeing similar issues. So
yeah, for sure. We also will have a copy for you at the Montclair Public Library. So I would be delighted if you would come to the library and check it out there.
Will it be available at Washington Booksellers?
I don't know. This is a good question. I'll call them up after this and make sure.
See, I tell you, Zoe, I'm helping you market this thing.
You are, Krista. You are. I was a little slow. Academics aren't great at that part. I appreciate it.
I hate to break up the party. Our time is kind of winding down. If you have any closing statements or comments, we'd love to hear them.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone who's here. You're really showing, I think, the passion that we have in Montclair, because I know there's a lot of Montclair folks here, to show up and learn about the history of our schools, the question of educational equality, and how to improve conditions in our schools. So thank you to all of you for coming. And I do think Montclair is doing a very good job. I'm pleased with our school integration plan. I'm a strong and vocal supporter of it. It's just that we have work to do. So I know we will all come to the table and continue in that effort. And thank you for those of you that are showing up.
And I have to say, Zoe, thank you for inviting me. And I have to say, thank you all for the comments in the chat. We're diverse, so diversity is not easy. It means that we will have different ideas and different statements. And some of the statements in the chat, I'm thinking, wow, that gives me something to think about. So I appreciate it. You are so engaged and a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Krista. And thank you to everyone at the Montclair Public Library for hosting us.
And thank you, Matt, Patty, and Maurice for teaching us the technical stuff.
Thank you, guys.
We're so fortunate to have you both. I can't wait to read the book.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Everyone have a wonderful night.
Okay.